The day my mother told me I was no longer her daughter, she was standing in her kitchen holding a dishcloth like it was the most casual conversation in the world. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She simply looked at me and said that if I kept going the way I was going, she wanted no part of it. I was 31 years old, I had just buried the hardest year of my life, and the woman who was supposed to love me without conditions handed me back like a return at a store. I drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel and told myself that maybe I deserved it. I believed that for longer than I am comfortable admitting. But here is what my mother never counted on. She never counted on what I would build once I stopped waiting for her approval. And she never counted on my daughter. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honestly. If the person who was supposed to be your biggest supporter became the one tearing you down the most, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet and kept trying? Would you have walked away sooner? Think about that as you listen, because Patricia's answer to that question took years to find, and when she finally found it, it changed everything. My name is Patricia. I am 43 years old now, and I run a small but successful interior design consultancy from a studio I built with my own hands in a city where nobody handed me anything. I have a daughter named Celeste who is 17 and who every single day reminds me why surviving the hard years was worth it. I have a life I am genuinely proud of, but if you had met me 12 years ago, you would have seen a very different woman. You would have seen someone who spent more energy trying to earn love than building her own future. You would have seen someone who kept showing up for people who only noticed her when they needed something. And at the center of all of it was my mother, Diane. I want to be clear about something before I go further into this. I am not telling this story to make my mother into a monster. She is not a monster. She is a woman shaped by her own fears and loyalties, and for a long time those fears made her do things that caused real damage to the people around her. I spent years trying to understand that, but understanding why someone hurt you does not mean you have to keep offering yourself up to be hurt again. That lesson took me a long time to learn. Too long. Diane had 3 children. My older brother Marcus, who was her golden child in every sense of the word, my younger sister Renee, who she treated like a fragile thing that needed constant protecting, and me, Patricia, the middle one, the responsible one, the one who was always just fine. I heard that phrase more times than I can count growing up. Patricia is fine, Patricia can handle it, Patricia does not need as much. I believed it when I was young because I thought it was a compliment. I thought being fine meant I was strong. It took me years to understand that it really just meant I had already been quietly assigned a role, and that role was to ask for nothing. Marcus was 4 years older than me and had always been treated as the future of the family. My father passed when I was 11, and after that my mother transferred every hope she had left onto Marcus. He was going to be the one who made something of the family name. He was going to be the success story. Marcus knew this, and he used it effortlessly. He had a charm that made people forgive him for things they would never forgive anyone else for. He borrowed money and forgot to pay it back. He made promises he never intended to keep. He took credit for things he had not done, and my mother saw all of it and found a way to explain it away every single time. He is under pressure. He is trying. He just needs time. Marcus always got more time. I was the one who quietly filled the gaps. When my mother's car needed a repair and she did not have the money, I paid for it. When Renee needed school supplies and the household budget was short, I made sure they appeared. When there was a family event and someone needed to organize it, plan it, show up early, and clean up late, that was me. I did all of it not because I was asked directly, but because I could see that it needed to be done, and because some part of me believed that if I was helpful enough, present enough, and reliable enough, I would eventually feel the kind of secure belonging that I watched Marcus get for free. I was in my mid-20s when I met a man named Derek. He was warm and funny, and he made me feel for the first time in my adult life like I was someone worth choosing. We dated for 2 years, and when he proposed, I said yes immediately. I was happy in a way that felt almost foreign to me. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the part where my life starts to feel like mine. We set a date, we found a small apartment together, and I started planning a future that finally had someone in it who saw me clearly. My mother met Derek 3 times before the wedding. Each time she was polite but distant in the way she was distant with things she had not yet approved of. After the third meeting, she pulled me aside and said she had concerns. She said Derek seemed fine but that I was moving too fast. She said I should be careful. She did not say what she was being careful about, and when I pushed her, she changed the subject to Marcus, who at that time was going through a messy breakup and needed a lot of family support. I let it go. I always let it go. The wedding was small and simple, exactly how Derek and I wanted it. 40 people, a rented hall, flowers I had arranged myself because I had always loved that kind of detail work. My mother came. She sat in the front row and she smiled at the right moments, and afterward she hugged me and said I looked beautiful. I held onto that hug longer than I should have, searching it for warmth, finding just enough to convince myself that things were okay. Celeste was born 14 months after Derek and I married. She came into the world furious and loud and perfect, and I want to tell you that becoming a mother rewired something in me. It made me look at things I had been willing to overlook before and suddenly see them with complete clarity. It made me understand what real unconditional love felt like, because the moment I held Celeste, I knew I would never sort her by usefulness. I would never measure my love for her against what she could do for me. I would never make her feel like she had to earn her place. Derek and I struggled in those first years. Money was tight. He was working as a contractor and the work was inconsistent, and I was doing part-time bookkeeping from home while caring for Celeste. It was hard. There were months when we sat at our kitchen table and looked at our bills and just breathed slowly together and figured it out. During that time, I called my mother more than she called me. I was not asking for money. I just needed the feeling of being supported. I needed to hear someone say, "You are doing well, you are a good mother, keep going." What I got instead most times was a conversation that eventually turned to Marcus, to how much he was struggling, to how the family needed to rally around him. Marcus, who by that time was 40 years old, had started 3 businesses, run each of them into the ground, and borrowed money from my mother, my Aunt Frances, and 2 different family friends, none of which he had paid back. The crack in my relationship with my mother did not happen all at once. It happened the way a wall breaks from the inside, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. The specific moment that started the final fracture was the summer Celeste turned 4. Derek had landed a solid contract and we were starting to get back on our feet. I had also started taking design courses online at night, something I had wanted to do since I was young and had been putting off for years. I was excited about it in a way I had not been excited about anything in a long time. I told my mother about it during one of our Sunday calls. I talked about the courses, about my interest in interior design, about how I thought I might be able to turn it into something real. She listened and then said very gently that I should be realistic. She said that kind of thing was competitive. She said I had Celeste to think about and I should not distract myself. She said it the way she said everything that was meant to discourage me, in a tone that sounded like concern but landed like a ceiling. I kept taking the courses anyway. I kept them mostly to myself after that conversation. That same summer, Marcus called my mother in what he described as a crisis. His latest venture, a supposed import business he had started with a partner, had collapsed and he owed a significant amount of money to a supplier. He needed $20,000. My mother did not have $20,000, but she had a small property, a rental unit that had belonged to my father that she had been holding onto for years. She sold it. She took the money and she gave it to Marcus. She did not tell me, she told my Aunt Frances first, who told me 2 weeks later at a birthday dinner. I sat at that table and I felt the floor shift under me, not because of the money itself, but because of what it meant. My father had bought that property with my mother when I was 6 years old. I remembered going there with him to fix things. I remembered his toolbox. I remembered him teaching me how to measure twice and cut once. That property was a piece of him. And my mother had let it go without a conversation, without hesitation, to cover a debt Marcus had created through carelessness and bad decisions. When I asked her about it, she said she had done what she had to do. She said Marcus needed it more than anyone else did. She said I did not understand how much pressure he was under. I asked her if she had considered that the property might have helped all of us in some way, that she might have talked to her children about it together, that it might have meant something to me specifically because of my memory of my father. She looked at me with an expression that was not unkind but was completely unmoved. She said, "Patricia, you have always been fine. Marcus needs more help than you do. You will figure it out, you always do." I went home that night and sat in the quiet of Celeste's room after she was asleep, and I let myself feel the full weight of what my mother actually thought of me. Not Patricia, her daughter. Patricia, the capable one. Patricia, the dependable one. Patricia, who would figure it out. I was not a person to be considered in her decisions. I was a known quantity, a settled variable, the one who did not need to be factored in. Derek found me sitting there and asked what was wrong. I told him. He held my hand. He said quietly that he had been watching this for a while and he wanted me to know that he saw it clearly even if my mother did not. That was the night I started to understand the difference between being strong and being overlooked. They are not the same thing. One is a quality you build. The other is something done to you by people who have decided you can take it. The following 2 years were the ones that changed my entire trajectory. I finished my design courses. I started taking on small projects through an online platform, doing room redesigns and mood boards for clients who found me through word of mouth. Every small success felt like a piece of ground I had earned. Celeste started kindergarten and she was sharp and curious and she made friends easily, and watching her navigate the world with confidence made me want to keep building for her. Derek's business stabilized. We moved from our small apartment into a rented house with a real backyard where Celeste could run. My design work was growing steadily enough that I was starting to think seriously about making it my primary focus. Life was not easy, but it was moving. It was real. It felt like something we had made ourselves. During this same period, my relationship with my mother was cordial but careful. I called, she called. We had Sunday dinners occasionally. But something had shifted inside me after the property conversation, and I was no longer willing to be invisible without noticing it. I noticed every time she turned a conversation toward Marcus. I noticed every time she failed to ask about my work, my goals, my progress. I noticed every time Celeste said something wonderful and my mother's response was brief before she moved on to something else. I was not angry, I was just clear. Clarity feels different from anger. Anger is hot, clarity is still. The crisis that finally broke everything open came in the autumn of the year Celeste turned 6. Marcus had gotten into serious financial trouble again. Not just debt this time, but a situation involving a business partner who was threatening legal action over a contract Marcus had signed and then defaulted on. Marcus, in his panic, had called my mother, who had called my Aunt Frances, who had also called me. The family, as my mother put it, needed to come together. There was a family meeting at my mother's house on a Saturday afternoon. Marcus sat at the kitchen table looking appropriately distressed while my mother and Aunt Frances circled him with concern. I sat on the opposite side with a glass of water and listened as the situation was laid out. Marcus needed money. He needed it quickly. He had already used everything he had. He had already called in every favor he had with family friends. Now he was asking us. I asked a question that I already knew the answer to. I asked how much money my mother had available to help. There was a pause, then my mother said she had some savings, but she needed those for herself in case of an emergency. I nodded. Then I asked whether Marcus had any kind of plan to repay the money this time from any of us, including the money from the property sale 2 years ago. The room went cold. Marcus looked at me with an expression that I recognized. It was the face of someone who expected to be exempt from basic accountability. My mother looked at me with something harder. She said, "Patricia, this is not the time." I said gently that it seemed like there was never a time for those questions, and that maybe we should find a time because this pattern had been continuing for years, and it was hurting all of us in different ways, including Marcus, because no one was ever holding him to a real standard of responsibility. Marcus said I had always had a problem with him. My mother said I was making things worse. My Aunt Frances looked at the table. I said I was not making anything worse. I was describing something that was already there. My mother's voice changed then, not louder but harder. She said that I had always been critical of Marcus. She said that I had never understood how difficult his life had been. She said that I had had Derek to lean on, I had had good luck, and I did not have the right to sit there and judge a family member who was struggling. I want you to understand what it felt like to hear those words. I had paid for her car repairs. I had covered family gaps quietly for years. I had asked for nothing and said nothing and shown up every single time. And the story she was telling herself was that I had been lucky and Marcus had been struggling. She had rewritten the whole record. I did not raise my voice. I picked up my bag, said I needed some time to think, and I left. I drove home slowly. I put Celeste to bed that evening and told her she was loved and that everything was fine. She asked me if I was sad, and I said I was a little tired. She patted my hand with her small hand and said I should sleep good. I did not sleep well, but I felt something clear inside me that night, a kind of decision forming without noise. 3 days later, my mother called. I expected something, an acknowledgement, maybe an apology. What I got instead was a conversation in which she told me that my behavior at the family meeting had been inappropriate and that if I was going to approach the family with that kind of attitude, she was not sure we could continue the way we had been. I asked her what she meant by that. She said that she expected her children to support each other and that what I had done was selfish. I asked her one more time, very calmly, whether she had ever considered that I had been supporting this family in quiet ways for years without recognition. She said she was aware of what I contributed but that this was not the moment. I said then when, and she did not answer. Then she said that if I wanted to continue as part of this family, I needed to come back to the table with a different attitude. And that was when I said something I had never said to her before. I said, "Mom, I love you and I am not going to do this anymore." She asked what I meant. I said I was not going to keep showing up to be the dependable one who is never actually seen. I said I needed some space and that I hoped she would use that space to think about the things I had been saying. She said that was fine. She said that if I needed to go find myself or whatever I was doing to go ahead. She said she had enough to worry about without managing my feelings too. Then she said something that still lives in a specific corner of my chest. She said that as far as she was concerned, I had made my choice, and she was not going to chase after me. That was the last real conversation we had for almost 5 years. I want to tell you what those 5 years looked like because they were not the broken years you might expect. They were the building years. The silence from my mother was painful for the first several months. There were nights when I picked up my phone to call her and put it back down again. There were moments when Celeste did something extraordinary and I wanted to share it with her and had to sit with the weight of knowing I was not going to. That weight was real and it was heavy. But it was not as heavy as the weight I had been carrying before, of being present and invisible at the same time. Derek and I made a decision together in that first year of the estrangement. We decided to put everything we had into a real direction. I was going to make the design business legitimate. He was going to stabilize his contracting operation and we were going to build something that was fully ours. We opened a joint business account. We made a budget that was tighter than we liked but honest. We talked every Sunday evening about where we were and where we were heading. It was not romantic or dramatic. It was two people deciding to be serious together. I officially registered my design consultancy in the spring of that first year. I named it Mercer & Co., using the surname my father had carried and that I still carried in my professional name. It was a quiet tribute to him. I found my first real commercial client through a referral from a woman whose home office I had redesigned the previous year. The commercial client was a small medical practice that needed their waiting room and consultation spaces redesigned for a more calming, welcoming experience. I worked on that project for 3 months. I poured everything I had into it. When I was done and the client walked through the finished space and cried a little because she had been working in something bleak and functional for 8 years, I understood for the first time what it meant to be seen for what I actually created. Referrals built on referrals. A boutique hotel found me through the medical practice client. A restaurant owner found me through the hotel. My work became visible in a specific small world, and in that world I was known not as someone's sister or someone's daughter but as Pat. Risha Mercer, a designer who listened carefully, delivered beyond the budget, and made spaces feel the way people wanted to feel inside them. That identity was mine. No one gave it to me, no one helped me build it, and no one could take credit for it. Celeste grew through those years like something growing toward the light. She was in second grade, then third, then fourth. She was curious about everything. She liked to sit in my studio on Saturday mornings and ask me questions about the colors and fabrics and floor plans spread across my work table. She had strong opinions even then. She would look at two paint samples and say that one feels sad, pointing to the one I usually agreed was wrong. She had a sensitivity to environment and space that mirrored my own in a way that made me quietly proud every time I noticed it. Derek watched Celeste and watched me, and one evening, when we were sitting on the back porch after she had gone to bed, he said something that I have not forgot. He said, "She is going to be everything you always were, but she is going to know it about herself from the beginning." He meant it as a compliment about Celeste, but it also carried something inside it about me, about the years I had spent not knowing it about myself. I held on to that sentence. The fourth year after the estrangement was when Marcus found me. I had not spoken to him since the meeting, not because I had anything against him specifically, but because the silence with my mother had created a silence with the whole side. He sent me an email to my business address. I am not sure how he found it, but I suppose if you look for someone's name online with a bit of intention, you find things. The email was long and somewhat rambling. It started with pleasantries and moved into an explanation of his last few years. He said he had straightened some things out. He said he was working as a project manager for a construction company, which I was glad to hear. He said he missed having me around. Near the end of the email, he mentioned that my mother was not doing well. He said she had been diagnosed with early-stage arthritis in her hands and that her mobility was starting to limit her. He said she was proud, but that she was struggling with some of the day-to-day things. Then he said, and I want to be honest with you about how this landed, that he thought maybe it was time for the family to come back together, and that he knew she missed me even if she would never say it. I read that email several times over 2 days. I noticed what was in it and what was not. There was no apology from Marcus for his part in the family dynamic. There was no acknowledgement that the meeting had been unfair to me. There was no mention of the years of invisible labor I had provided. There was an explanation of his improvement and an invitation to return that was framed, not unusually, around someone else's need. I wrote back briefly. I said I was glad he was doing better. I said I hoped my mother was receiving good care and that I would give things some thought. I did not commit to anything. I did not open a door I was not ready to walk through. But I did not close it either, and that small act of not closing it surprised me a little because it told me that whatever I felt about my mother, it was not hatred. It was grief still. It was grief wearing patience. That was also the year my business crossed a threshold that I had not publicly celebrated but privately felt deeply. Mercer & Co. completed its 20th commercial project. We were hired to redesign the interior of a regional wellness center, a project that was photographed and featured in a local design publication. When the article came out, it listed my name, my company name, and a brief professional biography. I remember reading that biography and feeling something settle in me. This is who I am now, this is something real. I did not tell my mother, I had no way to, but somewhere in the back of my mind I thought about her. I thought about the Sunday call when she had told me to be realistic. I thought about how she had looked when she said it, careful and gently dismissive as if she was protecting me from disappointment. I thought about what she would have said if she had read that article. I am not sure what I decided she would have said, maybe nothing, maybe something, it does not matter. The article was real whether she read it or not. In the spring of Celeste's 5th year of school, something happened that I had not planned for. A woman named Gloria came into my studio for a consultation. She was redesigning a private home and had been referred by the boutique hotel I had worked with years earlier. During our initial conversation, Gloria mentioned in passing that she volunteered at a community center in the neighborhood where my mother lived. She mentioned the neighborhood by name, and something in my face must have shifted because she paused and asked if I was familiar with the area. I said I had family there. She mentioned a few community events she had organized. And then she said something that stopped me. She said she knew a woman named Diane who sometimes came to the center's afternoon programs and that Diane had mentioned once that she had a daughter who did something in design. Gloria looked at me with quiet curiosity and I looked back at her and neither of us said much more about it. But the information sat with me for a long time afterward. My mother had mentioned me to a stranger at a community center. She had mentioned specifically that she had a daughter who did something in design. That was more than nothing. That was not a woman who had erased me. That was a woman carrying a complicated story about me that included, somewhere inside it, something she recognized as worth mentioning. I called Marcus that evening for the first time since I had replied to his email. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. We talked for almost an hour. I told him what I had heard from Gloria. There was a long pause, then he said very quietly that she talked about me more than I knew. He said she had read the article about the wellness center. He said she had shown it to Aunt Frances. He said she kept a copy of it in a kitchen drawer. I sat with my phone in my hand in my dark studio, and I felt something shift inside me that was not reconciliation but was something in the direction of it. The first step toward a complicated walk. Derek and I talked about it for several weeks. He was careful with his words because he knew how much this cost me and how much the wrong move would cost me more. He did not push me in any direction. He said only that whatever I decided, Celeste and he would be there, and that I should make the decision that I could live with long term, not the one that felt easiest short term. That framing helped me more than anything else. I decided to reach out to my mother, not with a phone call because I knew a phone call would become a conversation that moved too fast for both of us. I wrote her a letter, an actual handwritten letter on real paper, which I had not done in years. I told her I had thought about our silence for a long time. I told her I understood that some of what had happened between us was complicated and that I had not been perfect either. I told her I had built something I was proud of and that I wanted her to know that. I told her that I missed her in the way you miss something that used to be a given. And I told her that if she ever wanted to see Celeste, I was open to that conversation, but that I needed her to also be open to a real conversation about how things had been between us, because I was not interested in returning to the way things had been. I sealed the letter and mailed it to her house. 2 weeks passed with no response. I told myself I had done what I could do and I tried to leave it there. On the 16th day, my mother called. She called my cell phone in the late afternoon on a Tuesday. I let it ring for a moment before I answered. She sounded older than I remembered. Her voice was the same voice, but it had more air in it, more space between the words. She said, "Patricia." I said, "Mom." Then she said, "I got your letter." And she said it in a way that told me she had read it more than once. What followed was not a clean reconciliation. Let me be honest with you about that. It was not a movie moment where everything was said and forgiven and made right in a single hour. It was a long, uneven, sometimes painful series of conversations over the following months. There were things my mother said that were hard to hear. She admitted that she had not been fair. She used that word, fair, which surprised me because I had expected her to retreat behind the language of doing her best. She said that she had known for a long time that she leaned too heavily on me and did not recognize me enough, and that she had told herself, I did not need it because it was easier than examining why she kept giving everything to Marcus instead. I asked her once directly, why Marcus? Why always Marcus? She was quiet for a long time, then she said something I had not expected. She said that after my father died, she had been terrified that Marcus would become like her own brother, who had struggled with instability his whole life and died young and angry. She said she had channeled everything into Marcus because she was afraid of losing him to that same path. She said she had used me as the stable ground she stood on while she tried to save him, and that she had told herself I was okay with that because I was strong. And then she said something that cracked me open quietly. She said, I think I made you stronger than you should have had to be, and I am sorry for that. I did not cry while she said it. I cried later alone in the parking lot of a grocery store where I sat for 20 minutes with my hands on the wheel and let it move through me. Not because everything was fixed, but because something true had finally been said out loud. We rebuilt slowly. My mother met Celeste again for the first time in 5 years over a Sunday lunch at a restaurant I chose, on neutral ground with a clear timeline. Celeste was 11 by then, and she was poised and curious, and I had not told her everything about the estrangement, only that her grandmother and I had needed some time and that we were figuring things out. Celeste sat across from my mother and looked at her with those careful eyes she had always had, and within 20 minutes they were talking about color the way Celeste and I talked about it. And I watched my mother light up at something in Celeste that she recognized from me, and I felt something I am not sure I have a clean word for. Relief, maybe, or the specific kind of sadness that lives right next to gratitude. Over the next year, the relationship between my mother and Celeste grew in ways I watched with something between wonder and a kind of quiet ache. Celeste called her Grandma Dee and they spoke on the phone about small things, television programs, food, the garden my mother kept in pots on her back porch. My mother sent Celeste handmade cards on her birthday that included a $5 bill and a note that was always a little awkward but clearly genuine. I watched this and I let it be what it was, which was incomplete but real. The harder part was my mother and me. I want to be honest about this because I think people deserve honesty about what rebuilding actually looks like. It was not warm and seamless. My mother sometimes slipped back into old patterns. She sometimes began a conversation about me and somehow finished it by talking about Marcus. She sometimes said things that were technically fine but carried the old assumption that I was the strong one who needed nothing. When that happened, I said something. Calmly, specifically, directly, I said, Mom, I noticed you did that. She usually went quiet. Sometimes she apologized. Sometimes she changed the subject, but she did not dismiss me, and that was different from before. There was a specific evening about 2 years into the rebuilding when things came to the clearest point they had ever reached. My mother called me, which she did regularly by then, and she seemed different on the phone. Her voice was urgent in a low way. She said Marcus was in trouble again, not a crisis like before, but a situation. He had left his project manager job and started another business. This one some kind of online reselling operation, and it was not going well and he was behind on his rent. She said she wanted to know if I could help. She did not say help with money directly, but she circled it in a way I recognized from years of training. I was quiet for a moment. I chose my next words very carefully. I said, Mom, I love Marcus and I am glad he is trying things, but I am not in a position to fund his attempts and I am not going to do that. I said that the most helpful thing anyone could do for Marcus at this point was to stop providing a financial cushion for the consequences of his decisions, because the cushion was allowing him to keep making the same decisions without feeling their full weight. I said this gently, but I said it completely. My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You sound like a different person than you used to be. I said, I am. She said, I think I like this version better, even when you are hard to argue with. And she laughed a little, a small laugh, but a real one. I want to tell you about the moment that truly clarified everything, the moment that I think about most when I think about what the whole journey was for. It happened when Celeste was 16. She had been working on an independent art and design project at her school, something that was part of an elective portfolio program. She had been developing a series of interior concept boards for fictional spaces. Thoughtful, layered, original work. Her teacher had submitted the project to a regional youth design competition without telling Celeste, and Celeste had won a recognition award in her category. The school held a small ceremony for students who had received awards and honors that semester, and families were invited. Celeste asked if Grandma D could come. I called my mother. I told her about the award. I told her Celeste wanted her there. My mother said she would not miss it. She showed up 20 minutes early wearing her good coat. She sat next to me in the front row of the school auditorium. When Celeste's name was called and she walked across the small stage looking composed and a little surprised and genuinely happy, my mother reached over and grabbed my hand. She held it tight. I looked over at her and her eyes were full. She said quietly, She has your eye. She sees things the way you always saw them, Patricia. I did not know what to say, so I did not say anything. I just held her hand back. Left. Erward, Celeste came over to us and my mother hugged her for a long time and told her she was so proud of her, that she had always known she was something special. And Celeste laughed and said, Grandma D, you barely knew me until 2 years ago. And my mother laughed too, a real laugh, and said, I know, and that is my greatest regret. Then she looked at me over Celeste's shoulder, and the look said something that she had never quite said in words, not completely, and I nodded once, and that was enough. There is a part of this story I have not told you yet, and I should, because it is the part that had the most practical weight. In the year Celeste turned 17, my mother was diagnosed with a more serious health situation. Not terminal, but requiring care, attention, and support in ways she had not needed before. Her arthritis had progressed, and she had also had a small cardiac event, minor by medical standards but frightening by every human standard. She was going to need help. Real, sustained, practical help. Marcus was the one who called me. He had been doing better that year, genuinely, with steadier work and a calmer personal life, and I give him credit for that. But when it came to the kind of daily, logistical, caring presence my mother now needed, Marcus was not set up for it. He lived on the other side of the city. He worked long hours. He was not organized with medical schedules and pharmacy runs and the dozens of small systems that sick people need someone to manage. He knew this about himself. He said so directly for once, without defense. And so it came to me, not because it always comes to the dependable one, not because I had been assigned the role again without consent, but because I chose it this time, actively and deliberately. I sat with the situation and I decided that I wanted to be present for my mother's care, not because I owed it to her or because no one else would do it, but because I had rebuilt something with her that was worth protecting, and because I was finally choosing from a place of strength instead of a place of fear. I set up her medical schedule with her doctor and organized her medication system. I arranged for a home care assistant to come 3 mornings a week, a cost I covered. I established a clear weekly communication schedule with Marcus so he was not absent, but so the primary load did not fall only on me either. I had real conversations with my mother about what she needed and what I could give and where the lines were. I was honest about the limits. She was grateful in a way she had not been capable of being before, a grateful that came from seeing me as a full person and not just a resource. On one of my weekly visits, my mother and I were sitting in her kitchen with tea. The afternoon light was coming through the window and landing on the table between us the way it always had when I was young. She said she had been thinking about the property, my father's property, the one she had sold for Marcus years ago. She said she had something she wanted to give me. She got up slowly and went to her room and came back with an envelope. Inside the envelope was a bank transfer document and a letter. She had been saving quietly over several years, and she had put together $15,000 that she was giving to me. She said it was not the same as the property, and she knew that. She said no amount of money was the same as that. But she said she wanted me to have something that was mine from this family, and that she was sorry it had taken her so long to understand that I deserved to have something too. I looked at that envelope for a long time. I did not say the money was too much. I did not say she did not have to. I said, "Thank you, Mom," and I meant it in a way that went past the money and into everything behind it. She nodded, she poured more tea. And we sat together in that kitchen for the next hour talking about Celeste and her design boards and what kind of life she might build. And the conversation was easy in a way that our conversations had not always been, and I let myself feel that ease without questioning it or looking for the catch. I put that money into a fund for Celeste's education. Here is what I want to say about Marcus. I do not carry bitterness toward him, and I want to be clear about why. Marcus was someone who was also shaped by circumstances he did not fully understand. He was elevated past his ability to handle it, protected from consequences past the point of growth, and never given the loving difficulty of real accountability. That is not an excuse for the choices he made, but it is context for understanding why he made them. When I see him now, which is occasionally, he is someone who has been humbled by life in ways that have made him more honest. He does not take credit for things anymore. He says please and thank you in a genuine way. He asks about Celeste and listens to the answer. It is not a transformed person's story. T is a quieter story about a man who finally stopped running from the bill and started paying it in small installments. I respect that, even knowing what it cost us all to get there. I want to tell you about the design studio now because it matters to how this story ends. 3 years after my mother's health situation began, Mercer & Co. had grown enough that I hired 2 junior designers and moved into a proper studio space, a bright corner unit in a converted brick building downtown. The walls were white and the floors were original hardwood, and I had filled it with plants and fabric samples and the particular organized chaos of creative work that I love. I had a nameplate on the door, I had clients who waited for my availability, I had work I was proud of. One of my junior designers, a young woman named Petra who was 24 and sharp and sometimes reminded me of a younger version of myself, asked me once how I had built it. Not the technical answer, not the business steps, but the real one. How had I stayed focused when things were hard? I thought about it for a moment and I said, I stopped trying to build in a way that would earn someone else's approval. I started building for the thing itself. She wrote that down. I noticed her write it down, and that meant something to me that I have not quite finished understanding. Celeste is 17 now. She has grown into someone who makes me feel like the whole hard story was a preparation for her. She is thoughtful and direct, and she has my father's way of seeing space, and she has a capacity for kindness that I hope has something to do with watching me navigate hard things without becoming hard myself. She wants to study architecture. She has already been looking at programs, already talking to current students online, already thinking about what she wants to build. I watch her think about the future, and it does not make me nostalgic. It makes me excited. I feel like the story is still going. My mother and I are not the same as we might have been if none of this had happened. That version of us, the uncomplicated version, is not available. You cannot rebuild a thing and have it look exactly like the original. It looks like the rebuilt version, which has different joints, different weight distribution, a different history written into its structure. But ours is strong, it is honest. It is something we both chose actively, which makes it more real to me than the original was. She calls me most Wednesday evenings. We talk about ordinary things, her garden, my studio, Celeste's school. We talk about my father sometimes, which we never did for years, and those conversations are always a little careful and a little tender, and I have learned to appreciate the care and the tenderness. She has met several of my clients at events, and she introduces herself as Patricia's mother with something in her posture that I had not seen before. Pride, maybe. Late pride. The kind that does not have the arrogance of early pride, but has more weight because it was earned by paying attention. I do not think my mother became a different person. I think she became a more honest version of the person she always was. I think the fear that drove her toward Marcus and away from me was real, and when it could no longer be justified by the story she had been telling herself, she chose to stop telling that story. That choice cost her something. It required her to sit with guilt that had no comfortable answer. I respect that she made it. I did not require her to flagellate herself to prove it. I just required her to be honest going forward, and she has been. What I want to say to anyone listening who is in the middle of an estrangement, or thinking about one, or grieving one that ended in a way they did not choose, is this. You do not have to wait to be acknowledged before you start building. You do not have to resolve the family wound before you are allowed to make something of your life. The building is actually the best thing you can do for the wound, because it gives you a place to stand when the conversations finally happen, and it gives those conversations something real to talk about. Patricia Mercer is not the woman who sat in that family meeting and was told she had the wrong attitude. She is not the woman who drove home shaking. She is not the woman who waited by a phone that did not ring. She's the woman who stopped waiting and started working and built something so solid that when everyone finally came back around, they could see it clearly. She did not gloat. She did not hold press conferences about her own success. She just kept her door open at the right size and let people prove they were ready to walk through it with honesty. That is the only revenge that ever meant anything to me. Not their apology, not their regret, not watching them realize what they missed. The revenge was becoming someone I was proud to be. The revenge was Celeste winning an award and my moth. are holding my hand in that auditorium and both of us knowing exactly what that moment was built on. The revenge was sitting in my studio on a Tuesday morning with a client who trusted me and a team who respected me, and knowing that every single thing in that room was mine because I had made it. If you have been the dependable one in your family, the one everyone says will be fine, the one nobody factors into the big decisions because they already know you will handle it, I want you to hear this. You do not have to keep earning a place you already deserve. You do not have to keep being the floor other people stand on while they try to save themselves. You are allowed to be the person who builds the thing. You are allowed to take up space in your own story. And if the people who underestimated you eventually find their way back to you, you get to choose what you build with them going forward. But you only get to make that choice from a place of strength if you spent the hard years building something real. Patricia did, and it changed everything. If this story touched something in you, I want to know about it. Have you ever been the dependable one who was overlooked? Have you ever stayed quiet for too long in a relationship that was costing you more than it was giving you? Or have you been on the other side of this, someone who only understood too late what someone was worth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters here. And if you know someone who needs to hear that building something real is better than waiting to be chosen, share this with them. Patricia found her ground, and maybe this story will help someone else find theirs.